Okay, in this video, I'm going to compare these two badminton clamps. One on the left-hand side, the black Yonex, the AC607, that is the serial number, I believe, and the Hi-Qua clamp. There really is no serial number, it's just called a Hi-Qua clamp. And I'm just going to compare them. I've been using both of them, and these are my opinions. Okay, first of all, if you look at it, at the size and the shape, it's really obvious this Hi-Qua clamp is much bigger and with a much longer handle. Okay, so because of that, it's much easier to grasp and to squeeze. You never really feel the clamp's going to slip out of your hand. You don't need much effort to squeeze the clamp to open it. It's just a much easier clamp to use, whereas this Yonex one, it's much shorter. The handle is much shorter, much smaller. So because of that, you just can't get the leverage, the same type of leverage as you can on the longer, the Hi-Qua clamp with the longer handles. So when you squeeze it, if you look at my hand, it's like it only barely fits onto like 1 or 2 fingers. You know, because it's so short, it requires a lot more strength, a lot more a lot more strength and effort just to open it and squeeze it to open. And I noticed when I was using it that this was oftentimes a bad thing. I was often getting tired doing it, and I always felt that if you're not careful when you're squeezing it, you know, the clamp could just fly out of your hand, you know, something like that, you know. I was really careful, and so far that hasn't really happened. I've only strung about 2 rackets so far. But again, you gotta really think about it. Really be careful when you're using it, when you're squeezing it, because it is, like I said, something like this. You just feel like it's gonna happen, and I never really got that with the Hi-Qua clamp. I never really felt like that would happen. So definitely, this is the blue Hi-Qua clamp is much easier to use, much less effort. You never feel like it's gonna slip. It's much easier to use, and so now, you know, of course, given the choice, I'd much rather use this. This is a much easier one, but that's about ease of use. Next is just comparing if you compare just the width of the clamp, the two clamps, this is also a very big difference as well. If you notice, the width of the Yonex clamp is much narrower than the Hi-Qua clamp. So maybe if I line up like this, it's really obvious. So because of this, the Yonex clamp can only grip a smaller amount of string at one time, a shorter length of string, whereas a Hi-Qua clamp can grip a longer length of string at one time. So in my opinion, that's always better, because the more string you can grip at one time, the less likely the string will be to slip and to damage, because when you got the same amount of force over a smaller amount of area or string length, then you're much more likely to damage the string. And of course, the more string you can grip at one time, the less likely you are to damage the string or for the string to slip. So that's another thing to think about. From my experience, I've used a lot of different clamps, fixed clamps, flying clamps over the years, and I've always found out that the longer, the bigger width clamps, they always work better for some reason. And again, another reason why this is so is I'm going to move over to my stringing machine here, and I'm in the middle of stringing a racket right now. And as you can see, I'm using both clamps. I'm not pulling the string very hard. It's only pulling at 18 pounds. The tension head is set at 18 pounds. And as you can see, when each clamp clamps the string, because the Yonex one is a much narrower head, a shorter head, you can see that it turns a lot more than the Hi-Qua clamp. So when you're stringing, you're always putting up with this. I mean, it's not ideal, you know. I mean, the Hi-Qua clamp it turns a little bit too. I mean, you can't escape that. That always happens with flying clamps. But the longer the head of the clamp is, the wider it is, the longer of a length of string that it can clamp, it tends to turn less, which translates into less tension loss. So from that perspective, I would say that this Hi-Qua clamp is a much better design, simply because it's longer. So there's less tension loss, and if you look at it this way, you can see too. And you know, it's always in your mind. It's always crooked, you know. Just looking at it crooked all the time is just not fun to look at. And you know, overall, you know, how much difference does it have in the final end result of your stringing your racket? It's hard to say, but just looking at it, it just seems like this shorter clamp, the Yonex clamp, just loses more tension. It's more crooked. And when the clamps are really close to each other, if you're stringing with two Yonex clamps, because they keep turning and they're crooked, they do tend to bump into each other a little bit when they're really close. But you know, that's only in the beginning, the first several strings. But you know, as you get farther apart, then yeah, it's not a big deal. They're not gonna bump or touch each other. But it is another thing to think about. So again, aesthetically, I would definitely go with the Hi-Qua clamp because it's just longer, doesn't turn as much. It keeps its shape a lot better than something like this where it just keeps turning. And you know, technically, you know, I would definitely say that this clamp, the one with the longer head, loses less tension. So I would say overall this Hi-Qua clamp is a much easier clamp to use than the Yonex one, for sure. So anyway, these are my opinions. Again, you know, just to sum it up, the Hi-Qua clamp is just easier to use. It has a longer handle, just easier to grip, less likely to slip out, just a wider head, better for the string, less friction, less likely to damage or for the string to slip, doesn't turn as much. And I think that's about all you really need to know about a good flying clamp and a bad flying clamp. Not to say this is a bad one, you know. I mean, it works. I've used clamps worse than this, believe me. Some other manufacturers, like some of the real cheap ones, I'm not going to name names right now, but it can be much worse than this. I mean, this is not a bad clamp, but you know, comparing the two, I would definitely go with the blue Hi-Qua clamp any day. So any comments or questions, just post it in the comments, and thank you for watching the video.